She had a stage, a following, and a dream. But behind the music, a terrible truth was waiting. How did a rising rapper become the center of one of Indianapolis' most shocking crimes? January 2025. A 2-year-old girl left alone, no warmth, no food, no one to help. When police arrived, they uncovered something unthinkable. Bite marks, frostbite, a small body, lifeless, gnawed on by rats. What makes a mother leave her child alone for days?
Here, on the ground floor of this apartment building near Shadeland and Fall Creek, 2-year-old Skylar Gardner died Saturday night. Police claim the little girl and her young sibling were living in horrific conditions, with the apartment floor and walls covered in feces amidst a stench of rotting food. According to this affidavit, the girl's mother, Chantel Gardner, told police she left her young children home alone for several hours every day and night while she spent time at her boyfriend's house.
Welcome to True Crime Anatomy. To my amazing subscribers, thank you for your support. May your family stay safe wherever you are. If you're new here, subscribe, like, and share. We bring you true crime stories from around the world, stories unheard, unseen, and happening every day. Indianapolis, Indiana, January 25th, 2025. A 2-year-old girl is found dead in a cold, filthy apartment. Her name was Skylar Gardner. Her mother, Chantel Gardner, known to her fans as Channy B Music, was a rapper trying to make a name for herself. Online, she shared music and dreams, but at home, her 2 children were left alone in squalor. Skylar and her 3-year-old brother had no heat, no clean space, and no one to care for them. For days, they were trapped inside an apartment covered in trash, feces, and rotting food. The smell was so strong that their own mother stopped coming home. While Chantel stayed with her boyfriend, her children suffered. The little girl didn't survive, and when investigators arrived, they uncovered a crime that shook the city. A musician, a mother, a tragic death. How did this happen? Chantel Gardner had a dream. She wanted to be known, to be heard. Under the name Channy B Music, she pushed her music on social media, hoping to make it big. She posted videos of her performances, shared updates with her followers, and kept up the image of a rising artist. To the outside world, she was confident, focused, and on her way to success. But her real life told a different story. Away from the camera, she was a 33-year-old mother of 2, living in Indianapolis. She had a toddler, Skylar Gardner, just 2 years old, and a 3-year-old son. Their father lived in another state. Chantel was the only parent they had. But being a mother required more than she was willing to give. Inside her apartment at Timber Point, there were no signs of the life she showed online. No signs of music, no signs of joy. The air was thick with the smell of rotting food and urine. Trash covered every inch of the floor. The walls were smeared with feces. The broken furnace left the rooms as cold as the winter outside. It was a place most people wouldn't step into. But for Skylar and her brother, this was home. For Chantel, home was becoming something else, something she avoided. She started spending more time with her boyfriend, Brian Thomas. Staying with him was easier than facing what waited at the apartment. It was easier to pretend things weren't as bad as they were. She left her children behind, telling herself she would be back soon. But soon became hours. Hours became days. Skylar and her brother had no way to reach her. No way to leave. No one to help them. 2 small children, locked in a place that was no longer fit to be lived in. Skylar was too young to understand what was happening. She was still learning how to speak. She didn't know why her mother was gone. She didn't know why it was so cold. She didn't know why the food ran out. All she knew was that she was hungry, tired, and alone. Her brother, only a year older, had learned how to survive. He ate as much as he could when food was available, stuffing his mouth so no one could take it away. His body showed signs of food deprivation. He had become defensive, guarding his meals like they could disappear at any moment. His small hands shook when he ate, his body desperate for nourishment. Skylar was weaker, smaller, more vulnerable. There was no one to feed her, no one to change her clothes, no one to check if she was warm enough. Her mother had given up on keeping up appearances at home. She didn't clean, she didn't bring them outside, she didn't take them to the doctor. The children were kept out of sight, hidden away. Family members rarely saw them. Calls to Chantel went unanswered. Visits never happened. No one knew how bad things had become. The last time Skylar's father saw her was months before her death, on a video call. Even then, she was lying against her mother, falling asleep before she could say much. That was the last time anyone outside that apartment had contact with her. As the months went by, Chantel distanced herself more and more. At first, she left the children alone for short periods, stepping outside for a moment, running an errand. But over time the absences grew longer. At first a few hours, then entire nights, then 2 days at a time. She stopped showering at the apartment because the smell would cling to her clothes. She stopped fixing things because she didn't want maintenance workers to see the state of the home. The worse it got, the more she stayed away. But 2 children couldn't leave. They were trapped in the decay, their small bodies adjusting to a world that had abandoned them. What people saw online was only half the story. In photos, Chantel smiled, posed for pictures, promoted her brand. But the reality was something she never showed. A home rotting from the inside. 2 children wasting away. A little girl running out of time. How much do we really know about people's lives behind the screen? Do social media posts tell the truth or just the parts people want us to see? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. The apartment was silent. No laughter. No cries. Just cold air and the weight of abandonment. 2 children had been left behind, alone for days. Their mother, Chantel Gardner, was nowhere to be found. In those last days, the temperature outside dropped. Inside, it was no better. The furnace was broken, leaving the apartment freezing. There were no blankets thick enough, no food to keep their small bodies warm. 2-year-old Skylar Gardner and her 3-year-old brother were trapped in a home that no longer felt like one. They had nothing. No heat, no care. No one watching over them. The last meal Chantel had left was long gone. The children had no way to get more. No way to ask for help. The hours stretched on. Hunger set in. The cold made their fingers stiff. Their tiny bodies had only so much strength to fight against it. Skylar's brother was old enough to know what hunger felt like. Old enough to understand that their mother was gone again. Old enough to know that crying wouldn't bring her back. But Skylar was just a baby. She was too young to understand why no one was feeding her. Too young to know why the cold hurt so much. Too young to save herself. January 25th, 2025. After days away, Chantel returned home. She had not come to check on her children. She had come to drop off food. But when she stepped inside, something was wrong. There was no movement, no sound. Then she saw her daughter lying still under a dresser. Skylar was unresponsive. Her small body cold, her skin bruised, her tiny hands and feet stiff with frostbite. Chantel called 911. When police arrived, they walked into something they would never forget. The smell hit them first. Rotting food, urine, decay. The walls were smeared with feces. Garbage covered the floors. The apartment was in complete disorder. The children's beds, their clothes, their toys, everything was buried under filth. The officers called it a biohazard. The moment officers started investigating and stepped inside, they knew this wasn't just neglect. This was something worse. This was no place for a child. The apartment on Newberry Road was freezing. Skylar's brother was found alive, barely warmer than the winter air. His body showed signs of starvation. The heater was broken. His hands shook, and no one had tried to fix it. He didn't speak. The walls covered in filth. He was too young to understand what had happened. Buried in garbage. But his body told the story. The smell of decay he had been without everything for far too long. It was a place where no child should have lived. An autopsy was done on Skylar's body. In the middle of it all was Skylar's brother. The findings were heartbreaking. Just 3 years old. The likely cause of death. He was alive, hypothermia. But his condition told its own story. She had been left in the cold for too long. His body was frail, unable to fight against it. Swollen from constipation. But that wasn't all. He didn't cry. Bruises covered he didn't ask for help. He just bite marks on her back and arms, unsure if they were there to hurt him, clear signs of frostbite. When given food, and near her grabbed it fast, something horrifying, stuffing his mouth, refusing to let go, believed he had been caused by a rat to disappear at any moment. Skylar had gone so long without enough to eat that his body no longer trusted it would come again. She never got the chance to grow up. There was Skylar. She never got the chance to be lifeless. Cold, at what point does neglect become murder? The bruises on her body told us what you think in the comments. The bite marks on her back and arms raised even more questions. The frostbite on her hands and feet revealed just how long she had been left in the cold. And then, the wound near her neck. The one caused after her death. The one that should have never happened. The scene was overwhelming, even for officers used to difficult cases. One detective later called it the worst living conditions they had ever seen. But now, they had to find out why. Chantel Gardner was taken in for questioning. At first, she denied neglect. She claimed she had only been gone for a short time, that she had fed her children, that she had cared for them. But the evidence in front of them told a different story. As the hours passed, the truth started to slip out. She admitted she had left the children alone, not just for a few hours, not just overnight, but for days at a time. She said she had felt overwhelmed, that she didn't know what to do, that she had let things get out of control. She claimed she never meant for Skylar to die. But was that true? The detectives pressed further. She had stopped cleaning the apartment. She had stopped taking the children outside. She had stopped bringing them to the doctor. She had stopped staying there at all. She admitted she knew the heater was broken, but didn't call for repairs because she was afraid someone would see how bad the apartment had gotten. She admitted she left her children behind at night while she stayed with her boyfriend. And she admitted that over time she had started avoiding the apartment completely. It was no longer just about neglect. It was about what she knew. About what she had chosen to ignore. Doctors examined Skylar's brother. What they found was disturbing. His body showed clear signs of food deprivation. His emotional and cognitive development had been affected. He struggled to react the way a healthy child should. He was weak, unsteady, and yet if Skylar hadn't been found dead that night, he might have been left in that apartment for even longer. The evidence was overwhelming. Prosecutors moved fast. Chantel Gardner was charged with murder and neglect. But the case wasn't just about proving what had happened. It was about proving intent. Did she know that leaving her children alone would lead to Skylar's death? Did she understand the danger? Then there was Brian Thomas, Chantel's boyfriend. He had been questioned, and his story didn't add up. He told police that he hadn't been to her apartment in months, that he had no idea what kind of conditions her children were living in, that he assumed they were with family. But detectives found something else. Phone records, messages, statements from witnesses. And slowly, the truth came out. He knew Chantel stayed at his place most nights. He knew she rarely brought her children. He had lied. To protect her. To keep himself out of trouble. And for that, he was charged too, with assisting a criminal. Now the case was moving to the courtroom. Prosecutors would have to prove that Chantel's actions weren't just careless, but deadly. That she didn't just leave her children alone. She knowingly put them in danger. That her choices weren't just neglect. They were fatal. Brian Thomas had his own trial ahead of him. He hadn't been the one to leave the children behind. He hadn't been the one responsible for them. But he had lied. He had covered for Chantel. He had done nothing to stop what was happening. Do you think he is just as guilty? Let us know in the comments. Was this murder? Or was it something else? Chantel Gardner left her children alone for days. She knew the heater was broken. She admitted she knew the risks. But did she truly intend for Skylar to die? Some believe the answer is yes. That Chantel knew exactly what she was doing. That when she walked out of that apartment, she understood the danger, the freezing temperatures, the hunger, the isolation. She had stopped taking the children to the doctor, stopped cleaning, stopped caring. She had given up long before Skylar's final moments. She stayed with her boyfriend, Brian Thomas, for nights at a time, pretending she still had control of the situation. She ignored the signs that things were getting worse. She admitted she had started avoiding the apartment because of the smell. But the smell wasn't what killed Skylar. It was the cold, the neglect, the absence of care. Some say this wasn't just recklessness. It was a slow, knowing choice, a decision to abandon her children, even when she knew what could happen. Even when she knew what the cold could do. Even when she knew Skylar was too small, too weak to survive on her own. But others see this differently. They believe Chantel never meant for Skylar to die. that this was not premeditated, but a case of extreme neglect, that she was careless, selfish, and irresponsible, but not a murderer. There were no previous reports of physical abuse, no history of violent behavior. She claimed she still brought them food, that she never stopped providing for them completely. Did she think they would be okay, even when she left them alone? Did she tell herself she would always come back in time? Did she underestimate just how bad things had become? Some argue that Chantel was overwhelmed, that she was a single mother who let things get out of control, that she didn't know how to ask for help, that fear of losing her children made her hide the truth, even as it got worse. But does being overwhelmed excuse what happened? Does neglect stop being neglect when a child dies? At what point does a failure to act become a crime? Do you believe this was premeditated, or was it an act of extreme neglect? Tell us your thoughts in the comments. Chantel Gardner sat before the court, facing the consequences of what had happened inside that apartment. She pleaded not guilty. Now it was up to a jury to decide. Was this murder, or was it manslaughter? Did she know her child would die, or was this neglect taken too far? The prosecution laid out the facts. They argued that Chantel understood the risks, that she had abandoned her children for days in freezing conditions, knowing they could not care for themselves. They pointed to her own words, her admission that she had stopped coming home because of the smell, that she had avoided fixing the heater because she didn't want anyone to see the state of the apartment. She knew what she was leaving them in, and she left anyway. The defense painted a different picture. They claimed Chantel was overwhelmed, that she had not meant for this to happen, that she had not physically harmed her children, that she had simply made terrible choices. They argued that while she had neglected them, she had never intended for Skylar to die. The jury listened. The evidence was clear, but the intent, that was the question. Was this a mother who knowingly left her child to die? Or was this a case of reckless neglect? As the court case unfolded, Skylar's brother was placed into protective custody. He would not return to his mother. Doctors continued to monitor him. His small body had suffered from months of food deprivation. His emotional development had been affected. He struggled with trust, with food, with simple routines. The trauma would stay with him for years. Outside the courtroom, people were asking bigger questions. How had no one stepped in sooner? How had this gone unnoticed for so long? Neighbors had seen Chantel leave without her children. Family had not heard from Skylar in weeks. Child Protective Services had never intervened. The system had failed her. The case of Skylar Gardner was more than just one crime. It was a reminder of what happens when neglect is ignored, when warnings are missed, when no one steps in until it is too late. Skylar Gardner never had a chance. She was failed in every way possible. Her mother left her alone in a freezing apartment. Her father was miles away. Family members didn't check in. The system never stepped in. By the time anyone noticed, it was too late. This wasn't just one person's failure. It was a chain of missed opportunities. A mother who abandoned her responsibilities. A father who wasn't present. Relatives who assumed everything was fine. A child welfare system that never intervened. Skylar was hidden from the world. No school. No doctor visits. No signs of life outside that apartment. No one saw her suffering. No one heard her cries. No one was there when she needed them most. Her brother survived, but he will carry the scars of this for life. He was forced to learn hunger, to live in filth, to grow up in isolation. He will never forget what happened to his sister. He will never forget what it felt like to be left behind. This was more than neglect, more than tragedy. It was preventable. Where do you think the biggest failure was? Family, the system, or Chantel herself? Let us know in the comments. If you found this case disturbing, there are many more stories that need to be told. Subscribe for more true crime investigations that reveal the truth behind the headlines. There are other cases like this. Children who were left to suffer, warnings that were ignored, tragedies that could have been prevented. Watch our other videos to learn more. If you ever suspect a child is being neglected, don't look away. Don't assume someone else will step in. Report it. you might save a life.